I want to this week get back to one of the issues that I touched on a few weeks ago, and that was what's happening with French Muslims. Now, the reason I want to get to this is I talked to you last time about the speech that President Macron had about the need for Islam to reform, the need to work with reformist Muslims, and the need for Muslims to begin to accept the social contract of what it means to be French. Now, for those of you that know me, know that I come to this debate as somebody who not only loves my faith, but really believes that the American experiment of secularism, which isn't exactly secularism, Americans' freedom is about the first freedom, religious liberty, against theocracy. So there is a separation of church and state. There is that Jeffersonian wall of separation, but there's no freedom from religion. It's freedom of religion. So that is in many ways a uniquely American construct. And there are some, I think, radical organizations like Freedom from Religion, which actually wants us to suppress our public displays of faith. But listen, I one of the core reasons I love this country is not only its people, it's not only its constitution, but it is this pride in faith, pride in a country being under God and having the underpinnings of a moral Judeo-Christian, and I believe Judeo-Christian Islamic society. Now, having said that, I was just taken aback by, and I happened to find this piece in the Gulf News, which is a Islamist publication, a publication put out by the Middle Eastern governments to basically apologize for a lot of their policies. Now, who was this written by? It was written by a fellow from the Center for Ethics and Public Policy, or the Ethics and Public Policy Center, Pascal Emmanuel Gobry. Paris-based writer, a fellow at the EPPC. The EPPC, as you all know, is a conservative, Washington, D.C. based think tank with obviously fellows, I guess, based in Paris. This one's based in Paris. He's written in Forbes, Atlantic, Commentary, Daily Beast, Federalist, etc. So he seems to have some conservative credentials. Well, he wrote a piece this week that basically equated, and it was published in the Middle East. So I can tell you, anything published by Middle Eastern organizations and governments is not going to be anything particularly dangerous to their establishment, to their way of life. Well, Gobry writes this piece in Gulf News. Actually, I think it was originally published in either The Week or one of the American publications. And he said, when France's National Assembly passed a rule last month banning members of parliament from wearing or displaying religious symbols, many shrugged that it was in keeping with the country's long tradition of strict state secularism. Instead, the ban, or the radical thinking behind it, according to Gobry, has become a major obstacle to peacefully integrating immigrant communities. So he then goes on, through modern French political history, including after the 1905 law establishing the separation of church and state, which gets us to exactly, I think, the more, and I can't tell you how important this issue is. Our organization, the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, is founded on the separation of mosque and state. We believe that that separation is the antidote to the threat of political Islam, Islamism, Islamic State identity. So he said, after this law in 1905 in France, members of the French National Assembly have displayed religious symbols. Indeed, though, much of that history, it never occurred to anyone that this could contradict secularism in any way. He said the 1905 law ended public subsidies for religious institutions, but instituted no legal or cultural rule against public expression of religious values. So why are we told differently now? And his answer? Well, millions of Muslims coming into the West, coming into France, immigrating, and it's only a novel understanding of secularism has thus emerged. The myth that state secularism has always mandated such rigid interpretations is convenient. So if there are a problem with French Muslims in France, they can be blamed on the reluctance to embrace sacred rule of secularism. And then he goes on to talk about Charlie Hebdo and others. And he said, the secularist mantra stifles public debate and prevents progress on the other dimensions, whether socioeconomic or cultural. And then he goes on to say Macron is absent. I guess he missed the speech that Macron gave last week. And I'm no apologist for Macron, but the reality is here is a conservative think tank has it all wrong. Has it all wrong. Yes, there is problems, and I have written with my Sikh friends and others about the pathology of the laïcité policies, which are hyper-secular and can be a major roadblock and obstacle to the integration of Muslim communities against the Islamists. But that argument, in a vacuum, where you don't even mention Islamism, where this piece, where the conversation pretends Islamism doesn't exist, pretends Islam is a beautiful religion compatible with liberty and has no problems, which he doesn't even talk about, is complete intellectual malpractice. It is intellectual malpractice of the worst kind for a conservative who believes in Jeffersonian and Madisonian liberty, who believes in the liberty of Locke, of all of the existential Enlightenment thinkers, to write a piece that now is republished in Middle Eastern Islamist publications because it speaks ill of France. It talks about Islamic bigotry. It talks about Islamophobia. Now, it doesn't use that term, but bottom line is that's what Gobry's talking about. And it does the job of the Islamists, which is to blame everything on the West and their society. So the Muslims are not integrating because of the hyper-secularism of France. Again, just like terrorism is a symptom, there are symptoms that might prevent some of the treatment, but the core disease is Islamism. So if you misdiagnose the core disease, you will avoid the most important treatment. If you misdiagnose the core disease, you will avoid the most important treatment. And that is so important. Because in this piece that Gulf News then republished, readers are left thinking that France is on the way to profound bigotry because of its hypersecularism, because of its reaction or equal and opposite reaction to the Muslims coming in. I think reestablishing French identity is important. I think reestablishing the underpinnings of secularism and how they reject theocracy is important. But you cannot have that conversation in a vacuum. You must have that conversation along with an equal discussion of the pathology and the incompatibility of Islamism. And that's what Gobry doesn't do. When we come back, I want to get a little deeper into what conservatives should be doing. What should the Centers for the Ethics, like the Ethics and Public Policy Center, be writing about the French hypersecularism and others that would make more sense than this deeply anti-Western apologetic, anti-secularism apologetic that actually feeds into the Islam.